Secretary of State Antony Blinken and his British counterpart traveled to Ukraine's capital city of Kyiv Wednesday. The visit comes as Ukrainian officials seek permission to strike deep inside Russian territory using American-made weapons. The United States has so far resisted those requests out of concern it could escalate the conflict. But the U.S. continues to support Ukraine financially, with Blinken announcing $700 million of infrastructure and humanitarian assistance.
We remain fully committed to Ukraine's victory, to not only ensuring that Ukraine can defend itself today, but can stand on its own feet strongly, militarily, economically, democratically, for many, many days ahead. The bottom line is this: we want Ukraine to win.
Seth Jones joins us now. He's a senior vice president and director of the International Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Seth, I want to grab on to what Blinken said there at the end. We want Ukraine to win. Donald Trump in the debate notably would not say, when pressed, whether he wanted Ukraine to win. What does that language mean for Blinken to say it? And then if a president did not say it or an administration did not say it?
Well, look, I think it has a great deal of impact on what an administration is going to be willing to provide to Ukraine. For Blinken to say that he wants Ukraine to win means that he will continue with peace negotiations and until any kind of a ceasefire or settlement is established to provide weapons to Ukraine. That's unclear with the Trump administration. If he were to come into office, he talks about a peace settlement, but that's going to be very difficult to do. The two sides are really far apart right now.
On this question of whether the U.S. should allow Ukraine to strike deeper inside Russia with U.S. munitions, what's the thinking on the U.S. point there, and might the U.S. find a way to accommodate the needs of the Ukrainian officials?
Well, I think there's no doubt at this point that that U.S. officials should come around to the Ukrainian request and to use not just U.S., but also British and other European weapons for strikes into Russian territory for several reasons. One is that they're actually helpful in degrading Russia's capability to wage war. Russia has moved a lot of its logistics outside of the range of a number of weapon systems, but ATACMS, for example, can hit them. A second is the Russians are using Iranian, Chinese, and North Korean weapons in Ukraine. So we've already passed that Rubicon. And then the third issue, just briefly, is at every stage of this war, there's been concern about escalation. What are the Russians going to do if we take these kinds of steps? And I think it's clear that that Putin has called our bluff every time. He's not going to escalate. He can't really escalate at this point. So I think the concerns and risks are actually relatively low.
Help me understand that. Why can't? I'm always fascinated. What restrains him? Why can't he escalate?
Well, I think at this point, as we saw after Ukrainian forces took areas of Kursk Oblast, and they still hold a number of areas in Russian territory, the Russian response was in part to conduct a range of cruise missile, ballistic missile, and drone attacks across Ukraine in multiple oblasts, multiple areas of Ukraine. Well, they've been doing that since the war began. The Russians have done basically everything within their means except for using nuclear weapons in Ukraine. So, I mean, I think they've gone up to the top of that escalatory ladder, in my view.
And finally, Seth, during the presidential debate, as you mentioned, Donald Trump says that he could have a deal right away. In reality, what is this nature or state of kind of peace negotiations? I mean, they don't really exist, do they? But give us a sense of where things stand on the willingness to even have peace talks.
Well, I think both sides have been willing to lay out conditions. The problem is they're really far apart right now. What the Russians are asking for Ukraine is essentially to get rid of most of its conventional weapons. And after being invaded in February of 2022, what Ukrainian president in their right mind would not defend him or herself against a foreign aggressor? The Ukrainians want back the territory that the Russians have seized. So it would be very difficult domestically for someone like President Zelensky to hand over to Russia territory that Russia has seized by force. And that means that what both sides are asking for right now, they're just far apart.